Welcome back to Cohort W. I'm your host, Chief Warrant Officer 4, Jesse Moreland. And in this episode, we're continuing our deep dive into the modernization of warrant officer professional military education with a specific focus on the Army's Human Resources Technician Warrant Officer MOS 420 Alpha. You may have noticed a short gap since our last episode. That's because I recently stepped away from the mic to focus on my own professional development journey, transitioning from a 420 Charlie bandmaster to a 420 Alpha human resources technician. From July through September, I had the privilege of attending the 8-week 420 Alpha Warrant Officer Basic course at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. The course was challenging, insightful, and personally rewarding. But what made the experience truly stand out was the opportunity to learn from one of the AG School's newest instructors, someone who brings not only a strong operational background to the classroom, but also a key voice in shaping the future of PME for our branch. That instructor is today's guest. He's been on the front lines of instructional modernization, helping design, and will soon deliver the updated 420 Alpha Warrant Officer Basic course launching this October. I'm excited to welcome him to the show and share his insights with you. Chief Warrant Officer 2, Josh Ricker, is an accomplished 420 Alpha Warrant Officer and instructor at the AG School at Fort Jackson. CW2 Ricker has served at nearly every echelon of HR operations, from the 82nd Airborne Division and 1st Special Forces Command to the United States Army Special Operations Command, or USASOC. He's deployed 3 times in support of Operation New Dawn, Operation Enduring Freedom, and Operation Freedom's Sentinel, and his experience spans conventional and soft formations. Notably, CW2 Ricker recently completed instruction under the current 420 Alpha WOBC program of instruction and will be among the first to teach the new modernized PME framework debuting this October. He also served on the Critical Task Site Selection Board, or CTSSB, helping shape the curriculum that will guide future generations of 420 Alphas. Today's episode is about warfighting, readiness, and preparing the next generation of HR leaders for the complex and evolving challenges of the future. Chief Ricker, how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing great. It's been a good day. I'm actually in between WOBC classes right now, so it's a little quieter than usual than on the teaching side. So that's something that gives me a little bit more time to prep for the new POI that's we're going to roll out here in October. So it's nice having that space to kind of reset before the class kicks off. Been able to spend some family time. I think my wife is already ready for me to go back to work. But my kids have especially enjoyed me, running them back and forth. It's been a good time to, again, kind of reset and do a little work-life balance, because I think that's been very important.
Outstanding. Well, let's dive right in. So, Chief Ricker, you've just finished instructing the final WOBC class under the Legacy POI, and you're about to help launch the modernized version this fall. What stands out most when you compare the two?
Well, I would say when I really look at comparing the Legacy versus the modernized WOBC course, I think the thing that stands out to me most is how we focus, or how we have shifted our focus from kind of like a checklist training to warfighter relevance. And I mean that in the sense that the old POI was pretty solid. It gave students the fundamentals of HR systems and processes, but too often it kind of stayed in the classroom. So when you left WOBC knowing how to process a leave form or site regs, but you didn't necessarily know how to apply that in the deployment or in the field, or being a member of the collective staff at the brigade level, and especially when you were advising brigade commanders. So the new design kind of flips that. So it's immersive. It puts students in situations where they have to brief a commander on personnel strength. They got to use real-time data or troubleshoot a system crash, like if they don't have access, to internet or to an HR system, they've got to be able to do that under pressure and kind of, improvise. So instead of teaching HR as paperwork, we're teaching HR as combat power. And I think that's the biggest difference in how it's modernizing the way that we do our warfighting function.
As someone who sat on the CTSSB and helped shape the new 420 Alpha training design, what were some of the most urgent gaps or shortcomings in the previous course design that you knew had to change?
Well, I knew the legacy course kind of had two big shortcomings. So first, I felt like it lacked operational context, and many of the other voting members did as well, because we knew that students knew doctrine, but they really didn't know how it played out in warfighting. Secondly, I would say it lacked in technology integration. As we've seen, the Army's HR enterprise is going digital, right? We have IPSA, we have Vantage, we have these enabling systems, whether it's Microsoft Office products, Power BI, and our old POI was still teaching framework from, the mid-2000s and late 90s. So on the CTSSB, we really identified those gaps because they were obvious. And we had to update training so that new warrant officers could walk into a unit and immediately add value, whether that was building a readiness dashboard, managing an outload, advising commanders on unit manning. The urgency to close that gap between what we were teaching at the schoolhouse and the operational relevance drove almost every single change that we made in the CTSSB.
So, with your extensive background in units like USASOC, 82nd Airborne, and the 1st Special Forces Command, how did your operational experience influence your perspective on what Warrant Officer PME should include for warfighting relevance?
Oh wow, that's a loaded question, but I think this is probably my favorite one that we'll talk about. And I'll tell you, those times and places like the 82nd Airborne Division and 1st Special Forces Command and USASOC showed me that as an HR warrant officer, I can't sit in the rear. Okay, we're on the line, we're at the tip of the spear, making decisions that affect combat readiness. In theater, if your casualty reporting isn't tight, guess what? You're going to have gaps in your replacements. Okay, places like the 82nd, places like 1st Special Forces Command, USASOC, those type of units, you can't have those gaps. So if you have those gaps, those aren't admin problems. I think those are warfighting function problems, right? So when I think about PME, I don't want the students just memorizing AR 600-8-6, for example. I want them to be able to rehearse scenarios where they're an advisor in the TOC at 2 a.m. and the commander says, how many combat ready soldiers do I have for tomorrow's mission? If PME can't prepare you for that moment, then I think we failed those students going to the field.
In your view, what does it mean for a 420 Alpha to be combat ready or warfighter focused? And how can PME better align with that identity at the basic course level?
I think it's looking, knowing, and being the part. And to me, I think being combat ready, that's kind of a broad question, but specifically as a 420 Alpha, that means you can translate personnel data into combat power. I know in my last class, that was one of the biggest things that I harped on the students to know. It's like, what's our crew manning? What's our combat power look like in all of our scenarios? Where are you in the tip fid, right? How are you operationally relevant? I want you to challenge yourself to look at all of these processes, these transactions that we're doing, and how is that enabling a commander to make real-time decisions? Because if you think about it, when you're not just counting heads, okay, with per stats and stuff like that, you're showing how those heads matter in the fight. You got to ask yourself, can you explain to a brigade commander that he's 15% under strength in a critical MOS and that it impacts his ability to seize an objective? For me, that's combat readiness for an HR tech. PME and the AGS, we have to reinforce that identity. So at WOBC, we now frame all the lessons with that question. How does this impact combat readiness and combat power? If the students leave here thinking of themselves as an integral part of the team that makes those type of influential decisions on how commanders operate and not just HR clerks, then that's where we've done our job.
You've taught under the legacy POI, and now you'll teach under the modernized one. What instructional adjustments are you personally making to ensure these new warrant officers are better prepared for real-world HR operations in large-scale combat?
Well, Chief Moreland, I think I could ask you that question, and I think you would be really good at telling the audience reps and sets, because that's probably what came out of my mouth 90% of the time. Would you agree?
That is correct. Reps and sets.
Reps and sets. But I would say personally, I think I've shifted lecturing, the slides and stuff like that to the reps and sets, repping those scenarios. I try to give students reps and things like building Power BI dashboards, in the modernized course that we're going to roll out. In the previous one, the legacy one, we did more of Excel, but still trying to answer the question, right? We talked about validating the IPSA data. We all know that IPSA is not exactly where we want it to be right now, but it involves us doing our part to get it where we need it to be. So validating that is critical to completing any of our tasks. And also briefing notional brigade commanders. I serve, and I've brought other leaders throughout the AGS into the classroom to kind of pose as that notional brigade commander to add that realism into the training, into the reps. So they get those hands-on practices of making those mistakes in the classroom and being able to fix them before they go out to the field. And I feel like just another adjustment is I bring my own personal operational stories. I know I probably talked about the 82nd too much, in my instruction, but I really wanted to give those concrete experiences from what I learned as a very young W01 at my brigade, so they can understand the realism of what they're about to encounter. Not everybody's journey as a W1 is going to be the same, but some of those big muscle movements as a brigade HR tech, I really wanted to highlight those. So when I did that, I felt like the students kind of perked up. I think that's what led to more, discussion amongst the class, peer to peer. And especially when you have a multi-component classroom, it's really good to bring those concrete experiences to life, because that enables, the learning experience to be greater, in my opinion, because you're getting all of those different experiences from the reserve and the guard and active component all mixed in together. And at the end of the day, I think my goal was for those students to leave WOBC not just knowing HR, but, being able to adapt, in all those different scenarios, whether it's Compo 1, 2, or 3, and being able to apply it under stress. Because when we're talking about how we marry our HR core competencies with large-scale combat operations, it's always going to be a stressful environment.
As a data analytics graduate from Cornell University and a certified IPSA instructor, how important is it for PME to incorporate modern systems thinking, especially when it comes to readiness reporting, digital HR operations, or sustainment integration?
Oh, Chief Moreland, I think this one's going to get me beat up the most. I know everybody out there loves data right now. That's a hot topic. And, when we're modernizing the way that we do business, I have to say, it's one of the most important things that we can self-develop ourselves with, diving into the minutiae of how we do that. But I will tell you, modern systems thinking, that's one of my biggest passions. And the Army fights with that now, right? That is part of the fight. And readiness reporting, casualty operations, potential replacement flow, all that right now is digital. So if a 420 Alpha isn't comfortable leading in that space, guess what? They're already behind. And PME has to teach systems mastery to a degree, right? But it's not enough to just click buttons in IPSE. You've got to be able to explain what the data means. You've got to be able to brief the commander on why his personnel numbers matter. You got to be able to, how to talk about casualty replacement flow, kind of tie that to the logistics timelines. That's systems thinking. Be able to tell the story with the data. There's so many times that we just throw stuff up on a dashboard, and we just expect commanders to just look up there and them be able to read your mind. But those days are over with. I mean, it's great to be able to build those things, but to be able to answer the question that's being asked, that is the most pivotal requirement that we have as HR technicians. And I'd say when I graduated from Cornell with my data analytics background, it kind of changed how I viewed HR and all the readiness metrics that we use, because before, I'll tell you, it was a little lack of maturity on my part of, hey, I just wanted something that looked really cool. I wanted to, outdo or best my peers, with building a great product that I thought the boss would like. But the end state was the most important part of, is it answering the question? So that's where I would challenge all 420 Alphas when we're talking about being in the data realm and being operationally relevant. How am I making the boss better at decision making? That's the end state, and that's how we need to drive our data initiatives, in Josh Ricker's opinion, in the AG Corps.
So there's a long-standing discussion about PME needing to balance doctrine and reality. Based on your deployments and unit-level experience, where do you think PME needs to lean in harder? More doctrine, more scenario-based application, or more systems mastery?
I know this is going to sound a little cop-outish, but I would say it's a blend of all three. And when you're asking me, I guess, a more pointed question on which one should we lean more forward in, I think that's kind of harder to answer. But I will tell you, doctrine, that's our bedrock. That is absolutely our foundation. Okay, it gives us that shared language. Okay, Chief Ricker and Chief Moreland need to be able to understand that language and be able to go back and visit it when there's questions, right? But on the ground, man, things rarely look like the reg or the manual, the ATP or the FM or the AR looks or tells us it's supposed to look. And I'll tell you, my deployments has taught me that HR operations almost happen every single time in friction. Okay. When I look back at when I was on the IRF mission in the 82nd, when we had to blow out to Poland, when Russia invaded Ukraine, I mean, there was so much chaos and friction, whether, in real time, to try to get paratroopers on an aircraft, wheels up within 18 hours to go and deter a threat like Russia for our NATO allies, right? And I'll tell you, things went down. DTAS wasn't perfect. Personnel arrived late. The missions change. When is this flight going to leave? Is there enough room at the theater gateway for them? All those things were coming up. Meeting hit times. Obviously, I'm outloading myself, so my internal HR support elements are going forward, and I'm having to, do those with an S1 shop that's, 2 or 3 people deep now, because my HR team in the S1 has gone forward. So PME has to kind of simulate those friction points, right? So that means less time, memorizing your slides, and more time doing scenario-based application. And kind of like we've already talked about before, that muscle memory, I think, is what sticks. All right. And I'll give you another example. You just can't teach how we do the strength reporting. We have to teach how we do it, how we brief it, and when half the data is missing. You got to be able to be flexible, and that's something that I imparted on the class. Always remain flexible, because in those moments of friction, you don't want to get in a bad spot being too rigid. So that's the reality, and I think that's what prepares 420 Alphas to lead effectively once they get to their units.
So, what advice would you give to other instructors or PME developers who may be skeptical of change, or who feel caught between how we've always taught and what tomorrow's battlefield demands?
You know, I would tell them change is hard, and I would say over the last couple of years, anybody that's been in the Army, regardless of enlisted, warrant, or regular officer, or regardless of branch, we're all experiencing change. Whether it's PME, whether it's structurally through RSTRUC, TAA reductions, all of these things. We're seeing so much change, and I know that it's hard, but I'll tell you, standing still and being stagnant, I think is dangerous, because the battlefield, it's always evolving. And when we tie in large-scale combat and contested logistics and digital operations, if we cling to the way we've always done things, or the way we've always taught things, we're not preparing our students for a fight, that's coming their way through large-scale combat operations. We can't keep preparing them for the old fight. You look at the war on terror and how we did COIN counterinsurgency operations. That's not the fight anymore on a larger scale, right? We're shifting our warfighting focus in the way that we operationally do things. So that's why, or that would be my advice, is to always be open to that change, even when it's hard. Again, it goes back to my phrase of being comfortable with being uncomfortable. So that would be my biggest advice for skeptics.
So, as we wrap up, what excites you the most about the direction we're heading with 420 Alpha PME? And what do you hope your students carry with them long after they leave Fort Jackson and head into the force?
I would say what excites me is that we're shaping a whole new generation of 420 Alphas that are going to be a couple things, right? They're going to be super confident. I want them to be very innovative, and I want them to be operationally relevant and warfighter focused. Okay. My hope is they won't see HR as like a rear area function, and they'll see it as, like we've talked about throughout the interviews, as providing combat power, being operationally relevant. And, I hope my students leave Fort Jackson with two things, and that's confidence in their technical skills and a mindset that they are warfighters first. And if in 5 years, one of my old students, they call me and they say, "Chief Ricker, what you taught me at WOBC helped me advise my commander in combat," then I'll know the modernization was worth it. And I feel that's what keeps me motivated, because that's when it matters, is when they're out there alone and unafraid on the frontier of freedom, making things happen for our nation. And if they can enable a commander to do their job, I think, and be confident about it, and, make the mission happen, then to me, I think we've done our job.
Well, Chief Ricker, thank you for your candor, expertise, and continued service to the force. As both an instructor and a seasoned warfighter, your insights are shaping the future of the AG Corps in lasting ways.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank the W Podcast and you, Chief Moreland, for having me on the episode today. I think it's critical that we share our message, we tell our story, not only as warrant officers, but specifically this episode as 420 Alphas, and how we're, modernizing the way we do our PME. We're adapting with the times. Again, we've talked about how change is hard, but we're making it, our top priority. to modernize with the Army and be in step with, those priorities and lines of effort our senior leaders are setting for us across different formations. I would also like to thank the AG Schoolhouse for allowing me to do this interview with you. And, I hope that, if there's any prospects out there in the field as far as senior 42 alphas, enlisted folks that want to make the switch, I'd love to see you in class. And, I just want to say thank you again. It's been a privilege to be on here and tell our story. And I think that's all I got. I appreciate the time, Chief Moreland.
Thank you again, Chief Ricker. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Until next time, be ready, be agile, and always lead from the front.